This is Libby French. Libby is a school counselor at Western Reserve Middle School, High School. She works with grades 6 through 12. And Libby has gone through training with Dr. Perry in the Sequential model for education and has become a trainer and has provided professional development for pre-K through 12 in our district. It's not just a building initiative, but a district initiative. So in that process, one of the activities we did was a book study, and we thought it would be a really great, I don't know, something to bring forward to Delta Kappa Gamma because of the type of information. And so Libby and I will be working together tonight to do this book study, but that's a little bit on Libby. I think I mentioned before some of you got on, Libby actually lives around the corner, about a quarter of a mile. So we've been neighbors and friends for a long time, and I look at Libby more as a daughter and friend than anything else. So we just happen to work together too. So this is Libby.
That's right. We're neighbors at school. We're neighbors at home, which is pretty cool.
Yep.
All right. So like Anne said, we are going to talk tonight about the boy who was raised as a dog. And some of you were maybe on last week's Zoom when we talked about at length, I know, in a lot of detail about the neurosequential model for education, and what Dr. Bruce Perry and his team are doing, not just for education, but for kids and families in a multitude of different realms, through mental health counseling, through like sports, and how coaches and trainers and different people like that interact with younger people. He also has a model for caregivers that is really typically used for foster families that encounter a lot of these kids that have experienced trauma. One thing that really drew me to Dr. Perry and his work, in fact, I was introduced to Dr. Perry's work in April of 2015, maybe 2016, when I heard one of the fellows that works with him, but I heard him speak at a play therapy conference in Columbus, and so much of what, and I can't even remember what his name was, but so much of what this gentleman that presented about Dr. Perry and his initiative, so much of what he said was, I guess, common sense, or like really just getting back to the basics. And that is something that is so refreshing with Dr. Perry. Even though he is a medical doctor, he's a child psychologist, he has all of these degrees and all of these letters after his name and all of this formal training. And if you read the book and you noticed in his introduction, especially in the first chapter called Tina's World, he really just has to get back to the basics of people, and I think so many times in education, we get caught up in, what's the right way to do something, or, is this right? Is this what does this acronym mean? And are we following this policy and this procedure? And, we can't take our kids outside for recess twice in one day because we have to get ready for these tests, and so much of education has been driven toward testing and perform. And quite often in the world of education or medicine or any of those things, we can forget that there is a human element behind that. And when we encounter kids who have experienced trauma and their behaviors are different than what we are used to, and suddenly the classroom management style that works for every other kid is starting to not work for a few kids because of the trauma that they've experienced, because of the way their brains have developed through that, and we have to take a step back and say, okay, what are we missing? So I talked a little bit last week about how there are good things that have come out of COVID. And a lot of, like, it's suddenly okay to take the kids outside for a lesson, because it's fresh air and it's better and it's not as COVID-y. I'm sure that's a word. So like, oh yes, we have to take the kids outside. Or in our high school, kids get mask breaks. So every 45 minutes, there's a group of kids going to the middle school gym or the high school gym, and suddenly they're just playing basketball for 10 minutes, or they're just hanging out with their friends, or they're just doing something, mindful meditation or deep breathing. So suddenly it's like everything else has been wiped out, like I know we had to go back to testing this year, but that's not where the focus is this year. The focus is getting back to the basics and realizing that, again, we're all human. We're all in this pandemic together. We're all experiencing trauma. So suddenly, even as educators, we understand what that feels like, when many of us have never lived through something like that. But we are seeing a greater population of kids walk through our doors in rural settings and urban settings, no matter where you are or what kind of population you're working with. Families have drug addiction problems, poverty, house fires. I mean, you name it, there are a lot of things going on. So again, that was one of the things that really drew me to Dr. Perry. And if you ever listen to him speak, and I highly encourage you to look him up on YouTube, especially now that he was shut down for a few months with COVID and couldn't travel a bunch of places. He has organized his YouTube videos, which was huge. That was when I first started this training, it was very evident that an educator did not put the training together, because it was like, seriously, somebody has to get some organization here. But he hasn't traveled the world and speaking events. So his YouTube videos are a lot more organized, which is awesome. Another good COVID thing. But again, you will experience that he is very, very down to earth, and he's very much, let's strip away all of this other garbage that doesn't matter, that and he'll talk about, like, he's also a neuroscientist, so the brain is what he has dealt with his entire career. But he'll talk about, like, don't come at me with all of these terms, talk to me like I'm human, and like, don't give me all of this other scientific stuff. Like, let's just get down to the basics of people and what they've experienced. So again, we are going to walk through, and I think, are you going to share Anne's going to share a PowerPoint.
And I don't know.
Oh, hold on. You have to go back to where you were.
Hold on.
Okay. Share your screen first, and then it'll give you.
Sure, Libby.
It's probably that.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, Anne has this fancy Mac computer. What is happening?
I don't know.
Okay, maybe try it again and go to Google Chrome.
I've never done this before. So what happens if
what the heck? This really is easy.
Then it's
but they can't see it. Yeah. We want to get to that point, but not until your screen is shared. Okay, so if you go back, there was a little message. It should be on your desktop. Open security and privacy. Ah, security and privacy. There we go. Oh, because are you recording?
Diana is, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
There you go.
Now we're making progress. Look out, folks. I'm I'm making progress.
All right.
I just have to,
Sweet.
you gotta put it in present mode. Yeah. Can you see it?
Yeah. All right.
All right. So again, we've got this book study, and I just had a little bit of background information about the brain and how complex and remarkable it is. We talked about the sequential, sorry, we're adjusting here.
Yeah, that works. Okay.
The neurosequential model in education, that was what Libby talked about last week, and the Child Trauma Academy, which is where Dr. Perry, does all his work and has a variety of resources. Just a little bit about our school. We are in Huron County, which is about 12 minutes south of Lake Erie. Norwalk, Sandusky, Vermilion, Oberlin, those are kind of towns around us. But basically, we have a population about 1,500 in the two booming metropolises that our district has. And we have one stoplight in Wakeman, and basically Collins is an intersection. So we're very rural. We have a little over 1,000 students pre-K through 12. And in the district, about 45% free and reduced. Of course, we think that number is probably higher because high school, middle school kids don't always relay information. What we have seen with our student population is that a lot of grandparents and aunts and uncles are guardians. And there are a lot of students with clothing and hygiene needs. Again, like Libby mentioned, overdoses. We have a lot of students affected with incarceration. You see a lot of anxiety and depression. Of course, those numbers in society overall have increased. And we also have quite a bit of attendance issues. So what is our district doing? Fortunately, we have an administration that is very supportive in all of this. And they have committed to the neurosequential model. Libby has, like I said, become a trainer. And we have a committee in our district that helps plan the professional development and doing stuff. I mentioned our district did the book study, and about 30 staff members were involved with that. And I know that we have 31 teachers in our building alone. So, that kind of gives an indication of I want to say buy-in, but I don't like that word. It sometimes has a negative connotation. But our teachers are also very conscious of modeling good practice. And so, what that looks like for our kids and beneficial to them. And then I'll let Libby talk about this just for a few.
So again, if you were on last week, you had seen an upside down triangle. So basically, our brains are categorized into 4 sections or 4 regions of a brain. The bottom 2, so this goes like in order. The brain stem, so if this was your brain stem would be down here, then your diencephalon, then your limbic system, and then your neocortex is like this prefrontal lobe here that does all of your, that's my prefrontal lobe, that does all of your thinking and reasoning and concrete and abstract thoughts. So we have talked a lot about, like, we ask our students to live in their neocortex in a school setting, for them to always be able to access it. But the reality of students in trauma is that they are typically, not all 4 regions of their brain are developed typically like their peers because of the trauma that they have encountered. So basically, that stunts the area of the brain that is associated with that. It stunts the growth of that and the maturity of that brain, that portion of your brain. So the brainstem and the diencephalon, so those are the bottom 2, I guess if I do this, the bottom 2 areas here those are subconscious. You know, we don't have to tell our hearts like heartbeat, heartbeat, heartbeat. You know, that would be exhausting. We would get nothing else done in a day if we had to tell our body to make our heart beat. Same thing with arousal, appetite, sleep, all of your basic needs, anything like that, totally subconscious. You know, we don't think, oh, I think it's noon and I should be hungry. Really? We think like, oh man, it must be noon because I'm hungry. You know, our body is telling us those things. We're not telling our body those things. Or our brain those things. The limbic system is where you have attachment, attunement, any kind of emotional reactivity. That is huge with relationships. And then again, our neocortex, and the neocortex does not fully develop until age 24. But again, that is where we are asking our students to live all the time. So information that comes into our brains that from the outside world has to travel from the brainstem up, brainstem through the diencephalon, through the limbic system to the neocortex. And when you have a student in trauma or that is very reactive to trauma, there oftentimes becomes like a traffic jam in one of those pathways, in one of the highways that are there. So like if you have a student that is just so tired, we all know, I mean, even ourselves, when we're tired, we're like, oh, we can't think, or, you know, until I have a cup of coffee, I can't do anything else. So when we have students come to us that don't eat unless they're at school or don't eat regularly, you know, they need those core needs taken care of before they can do anything else. I talked last week about, we have a student that really could be a chapter in this book that lives with a grandma. There are 5 children. Actually, there are 6 children in the house. Some of them are brother, sister. Actually, some of them are sisters. There's one boy in the house. He's a cousin. And some of them are cousins. The grandma is raising all of her grandchildren from her 3 kids because her 3 kids are all incarcerated for drug-related issues. This girl, when we assessed her through Dr. Perry's mapping system, which is just a series of assessments, you know, her brainstem, she was like average developmentally. Her diencephalon, average developmentally, because she's taken care of by the grandma. She's fed. She has a place to sleep. Her neocortex, even, she's very intelligent. Her neocortex, pretty average, even, you know, maybe even above average, but her limbic system is extremely below her chronological age. So I think she's like 12 or 13, when really that limbic system, where all of that emotional reactivity happens, those relationships, is really, really low. And that is a result of the trauma that she's endured and this environment that she lives in. So she's a really bright girl when she isn't going off on her peers, on her teachers, telling people to go, you know, fly a kite in much
graphic.
Yeah, much more graphic terms. So really, educationally speaking, to get her to learn, she has to trust the teacher that she's in a classroom with. She has to have a relationship. That teacher has to like be able to read signs of, okay, this girl is about to explode on someone. I need to remove her from a situation or change things up. Or we talked a lot last week about brain regulation. So again, all of the stories in this book, some are way more extreme than others, but just a really good illustration of, at the end of the day, it's all about the human element and a lot less about the test scores. Because when you have the human element and when you can connect to these kids and you can help them so that there isn't a traffic jam in their brain, and you can help them get to that neocortex, then the test scores and all of the other stuff that we want to happen in education will happen. But we have to meet all of the needs of the students.
I laughed about the frontal cortex because I coach basketball and we always said, why do we have to keep saying this stuff over and over and over again? Well, because the frontal cortex is not fully developed. So we had this symbol, like every time we were getting frustrated, we would just go like, that's not developed. That's why. Okay. So if you had the book and had a chance to read it, these are the chapters that are part of the book study. A couple of them are not, for just because they're not really education kind of related. So we'll start with chapter 1. And I guess before we do that, and I can't see everyone, but how many, I know somebody said they read the book. How many have read the book?
Okay, a couple.
So a couple.
So we can kind of.
And I know Donna, you said you read just the chapter on who the boy raised as a dog. Okay. So we're going to ask a series of questions. This is what came from the book study. And so we'll just kind of talk about it. So if you want to talk, you'll have to unmute. And this comes from chapter 1.
Do you want me to give kind of a synopsis of Tina?
And this was,
gonna...
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so this first chapter is Tina's World. This is one of Dr. Perry's first encounters with a child that has experienced trauma. Her mom brings her in to the hospital because of some sexual abuse that had occurred in the house, or with a family friend, I believe, or somebody that had lived near them. And the first time he meets Tina, and she is 7 years old, she meets him and then she walks over to him, gets in his lap and goes to unzip his pants, because that is her interaction with males. That's what she thinks is what
Is normal.
Yeah, is normal and what's supposed to happen.
So this was the first chapter in the book. So right away, I see a couple faces. You're like, whoa, that's exactly what I did, because I'm like, 7 years old, seriously? But that is what she has seen her whole little life, is, males basically abusing her sexually. So,
and he goes into a lot of detail about, he tries like talk therapy, and he tries some other things that all of these other, all of his classes have taught him to do. Again, kind of ignoring that element of human, the human element. And the mom keeps, like, she's missing appointments, or she's always late. She has a couple of other kids with her when she comes. And one night he decides, after one of their appointments, and he's getting really frustrated because they're not making any progress. And why does this mom not care about her daughter? She's never bringing her on time and all of that. Against popular opinion and belief in the medical field, he decides that he is going to follow them home to see where they live, right?
Yeah.
Follow them home. Oh no, or maybe they missed a bus or something.
and they drove her home.
He drove her home. And he discovers that this mom lives in an apartment in a pretty rough part of town.
They're in Chicago.
In order to get to the appointments, I forget how long it takes on a bus, but they have to go through many different public transportation systems. Like, it takes, basically this night takes hours for them to get there because of the different public transportation that they have to kind of hop from one to the next. And at some point in time, there's something with groceries. I probably should have read up on this. And he helps her get groceries into the house. And when he gets into the house, he realizes just how little they have. And he's like, well, no wonder this family, this mom is, here I am judging this mom for not being on time. But really, she has so many hurdles that she has to jump through just to get this little girl into my office. And that's when he starts to realize that maybe all of the things he's been taught about, don't get involved, or you don't need to know where they live or what their life is like. He starts to realize that if you ignore all of those things, you are completely missing the point.
Right. So, in the chapter, there was two mentors that Dr. Perry talks about. Well, actually, this is the first question. We'll go here first. One of the neurosequential model principles that can't be overemphasized is that changing the brain requires patterned, repetitive experience. Discuss how this applies to the classroom in much the same way Dr. Perry applied it to his work with Tina. So, I mean, and again, Libby mentioned this, a lot of this would seem to be common sense. But we know that that's like a dirty word in public education or education in general, at least my experience. If it makes sense, it seems like we don't do it. I don't know why that is, but so when you think about a 7-year-old and the first encounter is her climbing on his lap and unzipping his pants, how do you fix that? And how do we expect Tina to learn in school? And that's what was happening. She was a behavior problem in school. And so then it became, you need to go to counseling, you need this, you need that. That's how eventually she got to Dr. Perry. But I mean, as an educator, what would you do with a 7-year-old in your classroom who has known nothing else in her life but men and sexual gestures? I mean, anybody have any thoughts?
And I talked a lot last week about patterned, repetitive experiences. I know for a long time, Dr. Perry just colored with Tina. That was his patterned, repetitive experience, so that she knew that when they met, that's all he wanted to do was sit down and color with her.
Right.
Just simple drawings. I mean,
Right.
Just draw together and talk about the drawings.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it was just, when she came in, she knew exactly what to expect. There was no surprises. And so it established a routine. How many of us as adults want a routine? How many of us function better with a routine? Well, I know my kids had a bedtime. They had all this stuff. And it just seemed to really help them and us. But how many kids don't have that routine? So if in our classrooms we can give that to them, then they know that that's that safe place, and that's always going to happen. They know what to expect. And then that limits that escalation of her behavior as well. Okay. Again, why is that pattern repetitive experience so necessary? Anybody, these are the questions. So if somebody wants to, I don't want to be the one talking the whole time. So please feel free to interject your thoughts.
I always put up a daily agenda, and even with young children, they're glad to know, well, this is what's coming next, and this is what's coming next. And yes, there will be recess, and yes, there will be recess. It's in, and there's going to be lunch, and there's going to be, you're going to have a bathroom break. And so how specific you make it is based on how well they've been prepared, I guess would be a better word. But I do think the simple pattern of knowing what to expect, even if it may not be a specific time, because young children have no idea about time, but they do have an idea about sequence, that it's very comforting for children.
Right. And again, in Tina's household, what kind of routine was there? and just the fact that to get across town, all of the different things they had to do to make that happen, that just then adds complexity to her life at age 7.
And
Any other comments?
yeah, I was going to say it's Karen. It seems to me he also had to break a pattern. Was that he had to build trust with the child. The pattern he broke was that she could be around a male and not have to perform a sexual act. So it was the repetitiveness of not needing to do what had been repetitive negatively in her life.
Right. And then part of that then is that whole relationship building, and that not all males are going to demand that sexual activity. So yeah, and that you can have that positive interaction with a male. So then this next question, Dr. Perry had 2 mentors, Dr. Stein and Dr. Dyrud, Dr. D, I don't know. And in the chapter, Dr. Perry talks about their 2 styles. Basically, one is old school, by the book, medicate, whatever. That was Dr. Stein. And then Dr. D was, hey, it's an open book. You got to try things. So I think that's the other piece, like Donna had mentioned, having a schedule or an agenda. And so you try it the first day. Well, maybe it's not specific enough. So you have to go back and adjust it. So a lot of it is trial and error. What's going to work? Every class, every year is different. We all know that. So you just got to figure it out. And so I think that sometimes maybe teachers like this. I try not to be. But every year it's a new year. I don't pull out the same curriculum I used the past 20, or the same worksheets or whatever the case is. It always is ever changing. And so the same is true with working with these kids, and the fact that the number of cases continues to increase. And I don't know how many of you were aware of kids with trauma in your classroom. I know when I first started teaching, it was like, you didn't talk about it. It was like, throw it under the rug, leave it alone. Where today it's a lot more open, a lot more discussion, because we're trying to understand and better meet that child's needs. Okay. So Dr. Perry's approach with Tina, how do you think those techniques could then be translated into a classroom, or how you would work with kids? Nobody wants to talk, or I haven't given you enough time to think.
Anne,
Yes,
this is Darlene Malaska. I know you can't see me.
sure.
I started to teach in 1968, and I spent 44 years in the classroom. My, I would say, most commonly encountered reaction from a fellow teacher would have been, well, there isn't anything we can do about it. I don't know what to do, so we won't do anything. And I think that pervaded probably until about 10, maybe 12 years ago. So when I read this book, I have to be honest with you, I had a really hard time with some of these stories. With all of them, actually, because I thought back over the years that I'd been in the classroom and the number of kids who exhibited those tendencies that he describes in the book.
Sure.
I think Dr. Perry's approach, because it works so well in seemingly impossible situations, I think it ought to be part of every teacher's training.
Mm-hmm.
And
We've talked about that. Absolutely.
And again, it goes back to it makes sense. You know, you don't have to be a therapist, but I think that if you, number one, care about kids, novel idea as an educator, that you take the time to form those relationships and then just practice those little things we talked about. Routine. What helps a normal kid, you know, do those same things? It might take a little bit longer, but I think part of it goes back to, you know, nobody ever talked about it. You know, it was a big secret. And, you know, I always found that frustrating as a teacher because I wanted to know, but I also was not the teacher that would go to the lounge and then blah, 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 blah. Did you know? Blah. And unfortunately, I think that's part of why we were never allowed to talk about it, because we had those kinds of people, and it only takes one or two.
I think one of the things too that is making a difference is when we started facing what was going on. I'm thinking back to, I taught fourth grade, 10-year-olds. I had a young man who had Tourette's, who had many problems associated with it. And he was, of course, an outcast. But his mom said, "Can I come show your kids a video?" So she brought in a video, and I wish I could remember the young man's name. He was a teacher who had Tourette's, and he knew how to deal with him. But this whole video explained what Tourette's was. I cannot tell you the difference in the relationships between those kids and this young man after that, because we faced it instead of again sleeping in under the rug.
Right. And again, how hard was it? You know, just a little bit of effort and a little bit of time. And think about the change that you made for that one young man, as well as the rest of those kids.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not just the student with trauma that you're helping, it's everyone.
So. I agree. I have some children that I adopted that had some serious trauma. And after I had read this book a while ago, I just reread it. I actually asked the school that they go to read the book, and they brought in some people to teach their teachers about trauma-informed care. And they have changed a lot of how they do things that has helped not only my children, but a lot of other kids. And some of those things are basic, like the routine, just having the routine set in place.
Yep. That's one thing. When we first approached our administration about this, one of our administrators, who's very like a type A personality, you know, said, okay, well, our teachers are going to they're going to want to walk away with something like, when this happens, do this, this, and this. And when this happens, do this, this, and this. And we had to have a serious conversation. Like, if you really want to affect change and change the culture of the school and the way our students view these kids, that cannot be the approach. You know, it's just like teaching and learning. If we were only ever focused on what we were teaching instead of what our students were learning, then we would be missing the boat, right? Like, so it's the same way with behaviors and trauma, where we have to focus on the student versus how I mean, we do need, like, we have to really analyze what we are doing as adults, and is that the best thing for kids? Just like, you know, how many times we run into, like, okay, a student acts out, does something, and suddenly like recess is taken away. Okay, the kid that needs recess the most is that kid that's acting out and doing something. So even again, just that paradigm shift of, you know, by all means, this is not like a get out of jail free card. This does not mean consequences don't exist, but your consequences have to be a little different. Your consequences can't set the kid back even further, where, you know, like, this child needs recess, or these kids need recess. Like kids that are loud in the lunchroom and then suddenly they lose their recess. Like, no, send them outside to be loud so that when they come back to the classroom, they're regulated and they're ready to learn. Another really important thing I think to note too is that, again, this is like Dr. Perry's first aha moment of like, if I'm going to do this and if I'm going to affect any kind of change in this career field for these kids, I really have to start looking into different ways to approach the kids. And I think a lot of times, you know, and again, we're being met with more and more of that in the classroom of, okay, everything I've ever done isn't working for everybody. So I need to learn a little bit more about the clientele that I'm working with to be able to affect any kind of change and educate these kids. And I've heard it said, a lot of what we do is like, it's like an ice cream sundae. For some kids that already have the ice cream, this is just like sprinkles and toppings and stuff to just make the ice cream sundae better. But for our kids that are experiencing trauma, this is their ice cream. You know, the recess, that is their ice cream, or the repetition, or, you know, the rhythm and the consistency. Without that, they don't even have an ice cream sundae. They have nothing, an empty cup. So that's kind of another way that we approach this, where, okay, everybody's ice cream sundae looks a little bit different, but we've got to at least give these kids a chance.
Because who doesn't like ice cream?
I mean, I would have chocolate syrup, just so you all know.
Okay. So in the book, Dr. Perry discusses how our brains respond to novelty, either positive or negative. How does this apply to children in school who have experienced a different normal than what we expect? What is the key to helping them adjust to a new normal? So again, we talked about, you know, in my mind, in fact, Libby and I talked about a student today at school. This is how I see it. Like, in my world, it should be just like this. Well, that's not how it is in their world. And so, you know, sometimes it's, you know, we have to start thinking differently too. So what do you think about what is normal and how do we get kids to adjust to that?
I don't know what normal is, because I think it changes year to year with new kids and the new class dynamic that you have. I think you set the normal, and then with children that have trouble with the routine, you can kind of explain to them that this is how we do it at school. This is how we do it in this room. You may do it differently at home, and that's okay. You know what, that's okay. But here, this is what we want to do. And sometimes they, you know, they catch on real quickly, and other times that frontal cortex is really a problem.
Yes, it is.
And you just keep saying it.
You know, and unfortunately in Tina's situation, Dr. Perry talks about how then as she got older, she encountered some more sexual trouble, I guess, you know, acting out sexually with other boys as she got into her teen years. And he says, you know, basically that he didn't really help her change her behaviors. But again, he tried, and it was a starting point, and we're not going to fix everything, but we can't not do what's best.
Right. And I think the other thing that kind of goes with this positive and negative is that, especially in a classroom, to eliminate any kind of danger. So we don't want people getting hurt or anything like that. But that ultimately we are responsible for change, that we have to do something. And again, that repetition over and over again, if we want that change to happen. Okay.
I like to say something to go along with that. I think if you're going to expect change with that person, it's change is a part of every individual student in that classroom. So it's that the one who's going through the trauma is not the only person you need to really think about either. It's the peers, because there might be one special person who's compassionate and understanding and will be able to communicate with that person and help them build relationships, with a friend, like that, someone that they can learn to trust and then build on that. If it's just one person, it's one person.
Right.
But then the teacher has it. I know I have several stories coming into my head, but one little girl, I didn't talk about her to the kids with her present, but I had somebody take her, and I had a wonderful class. They were perfect. And I said, we need to kind of pull together to help her, because we all have areas to grow in, but this is an area she needs to grow. She's bipolar and has just a history and just a long story. But they were amazing. They pulled together. When she had her outburst, they would just keep on working, act like it wasn't even happening. But I had to have that conversation with them. It wasn't just something, they were first graders, and it wasn't just, when somebody has an outburst, everybody's all of a sudden looking towards that child. Well, I wanted them to not look towards her. I didn't want to give her an audience. So, and it worked out. So there's so many different things, but we do have to prepare this, the ones that are a part of that community, each person.
And sometimes I don't think we give our kids enough credit.
Oh, no. And they can do better than the adults.
Yep. Well, so it sounds to me like what you did was that you created a culture in your classroom that was accepting of that.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's beautiful. And that's what it's all about. Yeah. And we see as students get older with some of those kids that, they have built this culture and they help this student. And then suddenly they're in junior high or early high school. And now their parents have talked about this other kid at home, or, it's not fair that my kid's in a class with this other student. And, I could go on about, you want to know what's not fair if I didn't, want to
exactly
violate any kind of confidentiality. I will tell you what's not fair, but and it's building that culture. And we even have to help our students sometimes help their parents understand.
Exactly. Because I did have a parent, I remember, say something to me, because they felt like their child might be, slighted somehow. Of course, then you do have to educate the parents, say, no, your child's not being slighted, and it, I was able to bring that parent around. But I ended up having this little girl for 2 years, and she grew a lot. She didn't, she changed, and her father later approached me when she was in junior high because they moved, and then she continued to have some problems, and he wanted me to pay me to teach her and pull out of being a teacher. He's going to pay my retirement, all this stuff. And I'm going like, wait a minute. But anyway, he found other alternatives, but it was a journey. It didn't stop even after she left me. So.
Did you,
That's awesome.
In your school, were those same philosophies followed in other grade levels?
No.
So so unfortunately, you've created this repetition and relation, and then all of a sudden it stops. So then that child goes right back to where they were.
Right. That's why it worked for me her birthday was August. And so and she had some developmental things, very smart little girl. But anyway, she was adopted, and who knows, developmental things going on. But I felt like spending another year in first grade would definitely help her. Plus, I just felt like it was just more solid for her with the routine and all of these things you're saying. I'm thinking that's what we were doing. Oh my goodness.
Right.
But and it worked. But I know the teacher she had in second grade was she was good, but didn't have the same, the same approach that I did. And then the teacher she had in third grade, well, that's when, things kind of headed south. And then of course, that's when you had the SBH and all this stuff. And, and then that's the road, the journey she took, and they moved, and then they were wanting to place her, it was just very sad. I wish I had been able to keep her forever, but it didn't happen that way.
Right.
But for a school to take on that whole, that's just amazing, because that's what it needs to be. It's what it needs to be.
And I will say that we are very fortunate.
Yes, you are.
And especially for a small rural district, to have the support from top to bottom.
Right.
And there's a few teachers, but you're always going to have that. But
Right.
The majority, it's been,
Yeah.
except for COVID, that kind of threw a wrench in things.
Well, there's always something to bring about your change. And
Yeah.
eventually I went on to be a principal. So that was at the top of my list, to build that kind of culture in our school, so that there was more continuity,
Sure.
from grade level to grade level, and how we, responded to children with trauma. So
Right.
No, that's beautiful.
I learned a lot.
Yeah.
And to share the story. So one of the things that we did in our PD, like we had grade levels brain map students, and then share that with the next grade level.
Exactly.
So that
That's
they
what
had
we
that
did.
information.
Yeah.
Right.
In a
Because
different way,
again-
not saying it how you did it, but it was like, oh, we did that too.
Yeah.
So
No,
it's kind
right.
of, it's very enlightening.
And I bet, like anything else, like the pendulums kind of swings back and forth.
Mhm.
Because I bet as seasoned teachers, you guys are like, no, this is exactly
Right.
what we could do. Before technology took over, before, again, like the push of testing, and, it's like almost like education sometimes becomes its own worst enemy. Again, when you take the human element out of it, it's like, oh,
Mhm.
So I hope we're kind of swinging back to that. That's, my mom is a first grade teacher, and she has taught for, I don't know, many, many years. And she often talks about how frustrated she is. Like my mom's 70, how frustrated she gets with younger teachers that,
Yes.
like think that they know it all, or are so savvy with technology, and they're doing this and they're doing that. And I'm like, Mom, quit kicking yourself. You sing to your kids. Like, keep
Yeah.
singing. Do those things. Forget about what that younger teacher's doing. And they're going to realize, that really, again, it's back to these basics.
Yeah.
And I guess that leads us into our second chapter, because we kind of talked about that.
Linda, were you
I'm
going to say
sorry.
something?
No, I'm good. This
Oh.
is just amazing. I love it. So.
Linda Diltz, what about you? I see you unmuted.
Sorry.
Oh, that was an accidental unmuting. That's okay. We get it.
Well, and I know it's 8:00. So.
Oh, I know. Sorry. Diana, Ann and I talk a lot. So this is kind of probably a...
Well, when they moved me back into the counseling office, we're like, are you sure you want to put the two of us together? Because that could be trouble.
You might regret this. Our offices being next to each other.
But
I
the
think-
sad part is we go days and we don't even get to see one another. So
I have one comment.
sure.
I was a high school counselor, and then I had junior high. And when the junior high, I can't remember if it was coming from 6th grade to 7th or 8th grade into 9th, but the teachers would share things with the upcoming teachers, which was a good idea. However, if any of you've worked on a high school, you know there are going to be a handful of teachers that teach a subject and the kids just happen to be there. And so what they would do when the kids had problems, they would watch for those problems and nab the kid right off the bat.
Right.
And so I saw the good of it, and I also saw it abused.
Right.
Right.
Well, and that was another piece, again, with starting with really training our staff on what trauma looks like, or again, not even just trauma, but how kids operate in general and how their brains are developed and developing. And really it took us an entire school year, starting with this book study in the summer, to really start to shift that mindset. And like Anne said, we still have a handful of teachers that aren't there, and they might never get there, unfortunately, but we're really seeing a lot of change. And we also had to preface, when we met with all teachers at the beginning of the year and went through our rosters and talked about, here's just a little background on this student and this student. But we had our vice principal really kind of came down hard on, we are not sharing this information with you for you to tell anyone else. We're not sharing it with you for you to have a preconceived notion. We're really telling you this to give you an idea of the background. But I really believe that if we hadn't done all of this other professional development in this whole culture shift in our district, that having that conversation would probably fall on deaf ears. And again, they would be like, oh, here comes so-and-so, get ready.
Right. And I think there are some students that just kind of bring that upon themselves in a sense. But I've noticed that there might be that one teacher that really connects with them. Mm-hmm. And so, we talked about last week, well, not we, Libby talked about it. Like if I have that kid that for whatever reason, they can just push my buttons. And so I have a partner and it's like, hey, Johnny, can you take this over to Mrs. French? So we just have this system of like regulating ourselves as adults, and also helping that student in a sense regulating to get away from that elevated scenario. So
well, and allowing ourselves to still be human, because there are kids that are going to trigger us into that. Oh, now my brain is dysregulated and I cannot help you regulate because I just can't. I'm not in that state. And to say like, it's okay to be there and to recognize it and to partner up with somebody. Anne and I do that all the time. We do that with our assistant principal, who's a male, that really helps us, because sometimes, as women, we want to protect the girls in our school. And so we're like, oh, you need to go see Mr. Sheldon. We just know, or like, oh, so-and-so's coming down to the office. All right, perfect. Let's see if Mr. Sheldon's available.
Right. So,
okay, we're going to go on. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I have even found that at the high school level. Sometimes you can tell when a student just needs a change of scenery. You either send them on an errand or, hey, we do something, go somewhere else for a lesson.
Right. Yep. That, and I guess with all of these interventions, so to speak, coming up, that has been another huge conversation within the school of, you guys are really probably already doing these things. And this is just giving you the green light to say, it's okay. Keep doing those things. This is what's working. It doesn't have to be packaged in this beautiful, I keep saying like acronym, or this beautiful, here's this, now do this, like take this step, this step, this step. It's okay to just, again, bring that human element in and do what you've been doing. And if it works, it works. That's awesome. It isn't prescriptive.
Right.
Okay, chapter 2. Whoops. Oh yes, for your own good. Okay. So, chapter 2 is about a little girl named Sandy. And Sandy witnessed her mom being raped and killed. So again, heavy stuff in this book. I mean, I'm sure these are like the most extreme cases that Dr. Perry has worked with. But again, cases that have really taught him all about how to interact with kids. One of the biggest things in this chapter that he highlights is that patterned, repetitive interaction with these kids, and how he talks about dosing I don't know that he specifically talks about it in this chapter, but he alludes to dosing. So dosing is like when you dose interaction, positive interaction with a child, it could be 5 seconds long. It could be greeting them at the door and giving them eye contact and saying, hey, Johnny, how's your day? Interaction. So even 30 seconds worth of positive interaction multiple times a day, multiple times a week can be way more effective. And I'm not real scientific, so I don't know the exact statistic to give you, but so much more effective than an hour of individual counseling a week. So again, why it's so important that we view these children as children and not just test scores and all of that, to really say, okay, we're going to dose them with positive interaction multiple times a day and for weeks on end. And again, that it's consistent, that it is appropriate, that it strengthens the student's ability to learn. Sandy, he talks about, she's going to have to take the stand like a week after he meets her and have to recount everything that she experienced. Sandy also was cut twice in the neck with a knife in this experience. But really how he then spent a long time, not just a week, as her therapist. After this was, he's like, whoa, time out. We're not putting Sandy on the stand. That would be really detrimental to her in a week's time. So they said, okay, would you be her therapist? So again, he uses Sandy's case as really a big learning curve, I guess, for himself and everybody else. Sandy had foster parents, and Sandy endured a big custody battle, but in the end, custody was awarded to her foster family. But one of the biggest things in Sandy's case is that not only was Dr. Perry able to work with Sandy, he was also able to work with her foster family and educate people who did work with her, and I think even in a classroom setting. So again, it wasn't just him for an hour a week. He was surrounding her in her daily life, day after day after day, with people that understood how to interact and how to respond with her outbursts and her behaviors that had precipitated out of what she experienced as a young child. One of the things that he says is brains love what is normal and seek what is normal, even if normal is bad. So you might have experienced students that at home or wherever in their lives are just chaos, drama, verbally fighting with other people, like verbal outbursts. Again, the girl that we talked about that lives with her grandma and her siblings and cousins and all of that she is just creating a space every day where she feels safe. To us, safe is like calm and quiet and reserved, but that's not normal for her. So though normal, like quiet and reserved and, safe, what we see as safe is not safe to her. Chaotic verbal exchanges, that's where she feels safe. So again, to be able to help transition those kids to, it's okay, let's give this a shot, this new safety, but you're going to know what's happening every day. You're going to know our routine. You're going to know our consistency. And again, like you guys have said, for the kids in the classroom to be educated on how to handle some of these situations or how to act or react can be really, just huge.
So, okay, because I know we're like not even in chapter 3. Stairway to Heaven is about basically the David Koresh Waco, Texas incident, and Dr. Perry and his team got to work with children that went through all of that. And I mean, here's just the questions, but I'm just going to read one little blurb from the book that's just basically continues to drive home the whole idea of what we're saying. In the case of responsive parenting, pleasure and human interactions become become woven together. This interconnection, the association of pleasure with human interaction, is the important neurobiological glue that bonds and creates healthy relationships. Consequently, the most powerful rewards we can receive are the attention, approval, and affection of people we love and respect. So he talks about how it's that human element that is going to make the difference. Actually, I read that from the wrong chapter.
Yeah, but that's okay.
Okay. In the Koresh one, it says relationships matter. The currency for systematic change was trust, and trust comes through forming healthy working relationships. People, not programs, change people. So again, people, not programs, change people. So it's going back to that human element.
Right. And he talks about when they got those Davidian children, his people lived with those kids for 6 months. Like day in and day out, they lived in a house with those kids. And how programmed those kids were to, during a meal, the girls ate at one table, the boys ate at another table, and they never interacted. And, you know, like just all these different kind of, I guess, nuances that these kids, like it was totally normal. Again, it's because it's what they experienced. And it took them a while to build that trust for those kids to just sit together and eat their lunch. He also talks about there was a plane, they were outside playing on a playground area that they had outside, and a plane flew overhead. And again, he's like, this is like months into really, really intense therapy, and these kids are really making huge strides. And the plane that flew overhead was like a trigger, like PTSD, a PTSD trigger. And they all lined up in a line and started chanting something and walked back into the house. So just like that, you know, months of probably 24-hour-a-day care. And just how impactful those early teachings are on kids. I wonder if we should, where's Mama P? What chapter is she?
Is that the Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. Sorry. I don't know what I'm doing.
She's chapter 4.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Mama
skin
P.
hunger.
Oh, and that's the one that you just talked about.
Yeah.
So Dr. Perry talks about Mama P in chapter 4, and how basically everybody needs a Mama P in their life. And Mama P was a foster mother who just had this instinct of how to raise kids and how to help kids through trying times. And one of the major impacts, one of the reasons that she had such an amazing impact on these kids was that she was very confident in herself. And she was like, I'm not giving up on you. You know, do what you want, but here's what I'm doing, and I'm not going to give up, and I'm not going to give up. And just constantly cared for those kids. And that skin hunger, the skin contact, you know, she's like, I don't care who thinks that I shouldn't be hugging these kids and rocking these kids in my lap and just giving them that love and that attention. Mama P was all about it. And that in itself made the biggest difference for the kids that were in her care.
And how many times do we hear, don't touch a kid, don't hug a kid? And I'm old school, so and I'm not always a very good hugger anyways, but unless I get to know you. But
I hugged 2 kids today, even in COVID. Don't tell anyone.
But it's difficult for me. That's just a barrier that I have created for myself. But there are times, like last week, one of our basketball players her boyfriend was, contemplating suicide, and she reached out to an adult. And so we go all the way through basketball practice, and she just was carrying on as normal. And so when we were done, I pulled her aside and I said, hey, I just want to thank you for being so brave and talking to an adult. And she just breaks out into tears. My first reaction, I just grabbed onto her. So it's not that I won't hug, but again, we're almost ridiculed if we do, but it's a matter of what's appropriate, what's not. But I think that sometimes these kids need that, even if it's just one of these, they need that physical touch to know that someone cares about them. So, Mama P, indeed.
Oh, yeah. Yes, so Mama P.
Okay.
Which, let's see, The Coldest Heart.
This is about Leon. And this was like they had the brothers, they were in the same household.
Right. And how one was so different from the other
one. And then Leon ended up in
like
prison.
A serial rapist.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Again, some people, we're just, sometimes, we can do what we can do, but ultimately, we can't always save them. Or maybe Leon needed some Mama P loving. I don't know, but it's the fact that the intervention needs to happen earlier than later to be effective. So, okay, then chapter 6. This is the boy who was raised as a dog. I found it interesting that he didn't start the book with this one, but instead we got Tina's World,
yeah, we had
and
really
knocked
build
me
up
off
to
my
this.
chair. It's like,
Well,
holy cow.
And like some of you have said, this was a hard book to read, because it's almost unbelievable that some of these things can even happen. Yeah. So the boy who was raised as a dog, Dr. Perry encounters Justin when he was 6 years old, and he was in a pediatric intensive care unit, and he had been put into a crib at 6 years old that had like a makeshift top over it. So ultimately like a cage. And this child was not talking or anything like that, was like lashing out at anyone who tried to take care of him, like a wild animal, whimpering. The little boy rocked back and forth, whimpering a primitive self-soothing lullaby, filthy with his own feces. There was food all over his face and his diaper was heavy. Again, 6 years old, soaked with urine. He was being treated for severe pneumonia, but resisted all procedures because he was literally raised in a cage in a, well, he was being raised by his grandma who passed away, her boyfriend. And her boyfriend had never raised a child before, but he owned a kennel and he knew how to raise dogs. And he raised that child literally like a dog. It goes on to say, Arthur was not malicious. Arthur is the boyfriend. He was ignorant about the needs of children. He made a living as a dog breeder and sadly applied that knowledge to take care of the baby. He began keeping Justin in a dog cage. He made sure the baby was fed and changed, but rarely spoke to him, played with him, or did any of the other normal things parents do to nurture their children. Justin lived in a cage for 5 years, spending most of his days with only dogs as his companion. So again, I always say it's like sadly fascinating. You know, I don't mean fascinating in a good way. I mean like
tragic.
Yes, like
we called the book Tragically Interesting.
Yes, like, but again, how much a kid's environment and interaction with others, and even being able to read faces. Dr. Perry talks about attachment and attunement, and how even a child that has a mother that is going through maybe really bad postpartum depression, that doesn't want to look at the baby, or that's on a phone all the time, or, you know, all of these things, that babies and children, that's how they learn. That's how they become empathetic and humans. And, you know, this poor child was not human-like hardly at all because of zero interaction as a baby. Okay, yes.
Yeah, basically Dr. Perry then just starts working with Justin. Again, it's just taking small steps, learning what would work and what wouldn't. So you couldn't sneak up on him because that would send him into a frenzy. You had to like minimize noise so that, you know, he could stay calm. They used different types of massage therapy and obviously speech and physical therapy because, you know, being raised, you know, he couldn't stand up because he continued to grow, but he was in that cage. Used music. So again, getting that rhythm and kind of regulating his body, and then moving into, you know, getting him clothed and socializing with other people, so that he could basically live like a human being lives. So yeah, you know, here's a prime example of, you know, those 4 levels of the brain. And if you are stunted at the bottom, you never get to the top. So this chapter was fascinating to me because of the work that Dr. Perry did. Just amazing to me, I think. But,
you know, and we've talked about the continuity of care, moving from one grade level to the next, one teacher to the next. And this is obviously, this is like the most extreme case, but what, again, the continuity of care for Justin, he didn't start to behave as a boy for a long time because it was a process, you know, and how many students that we meet, again, you know, and their brains are developing. So as different parts of their brain develop and they're accessing different things, their development looks different every single year. So how absolutely imperative it is for that continuity of care that some of you guys have talked about.
Does anybody else have any thoughts? Because I know we're getting close to 8:30, and I know we didn't get through the entire book, and you guys didn't get to talk hardly at all because, you know.
No, because we talk a lot. I probably talk the most, sorry.
Yeah.
You know, the thing that makes this book hard to read, I mean, I've read pieces of it and then I have to put it down. It's just upsetting that most of these did not have to turn out this way.
Right.
And, you know, with Justin, it was really bad circumstances that allowed him to be in that situation. And the same thing with Leon, that the parent with the first child had family support.
Right.
And they said that, or Dr. Perry said that the mother was somewhat limited in her ability to take care of the child and to manage different situations. And then when they moved away and she didn't have that family support with Leon, then that situation put him in a dangerous position because she would still go on and spend time with Frank, but and then abandon Leon for the day.
Yeah.
So it just breaks your heart that adults have caused this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
true. And I don't know if anyone here has had students or know of situations to this extreme.
Yep.
And again, when we did the book study, obviously it was over a period of time. And so like we read 1 or 2 chapters and then we'd come and we'd talk about it. Then we would read more. So it wasn't sit down and read the whole book like within 5 days, because it was overwhelming. But yet at the same time, if he can make progress with these extreme cases, I need to make the effort to make a difference in someone that's not as extreme, but in their world is significant trauma. And so that's the other thing that was eye-opening to me, is like trauma in their world may not look like what I think it should look like, but it is trauma just the same for them. And I need to treat it that way. And I need to get to their level. And I guess I want to think that I'm smart enough to know that. But it was that, you know how sometimes you get so consumed in what you're doing, you forget certain things. So it's that, okay, come back to reality. This is how I really need to handle this. And so for me, it has been, you know, that rejuvenation, if you will, to continue to make a difference. Because sometimes you really start to question, you know, and you're getting in that 30th year and you're like, what in the world am I doing here? Am I making a difference? And so I know for me personally, it was good because I needed that, you know, to keep me going in a sense. As awful as that may sound, that I need trauma to keep me going, but yes. Anyone else with any thoughts?
Yes.
Comments on the book?
I have obviously I already said I had 2 adopted kids that have gone through a very like tragic situation, and I think one of the things that we learned and we applied to our school that we did not address was something as simple, and this helped a lot of other students without even realizing it, is things that we do because we're mandated by the state, fire drills or evacuation drills or tornado drills, set these kids off. And you might not even realize that it's setting them off, but just knowing that in advance and either prepping them ahead of time or warning them, or in my case, we actually remove the kids and take them out of the school while the drill is going on because it sets them off so bad. But that's just one thing that our school's done as a result of my kids that's actually helped multiple kids.
Jennifer, bless you for being a foster parent and taking kids in.
I was a foster parent. I did that for about 3 years, and I've seen a lot. But the last ones, we adopted the 2, and they went through some really horrific things.
Well, God bless you.
But thanks.
So I don't know, does anybody else have anything?
I was just going to comment. I think it was last week, Anne, that you mentioned that you're like, just, you know, raised in an ordinary lifestyle. You had no clue that some of this went on. And I was raised in rural Ohio too. And as a registered nurse, working as a young nurse, working at Children's Hospital, it was scary, very scary at first, because we're seeing them at the end of something that's physically traumatic and sometimes emotional as well. And we know that, you know, with suicides in adolescence being up in younger kids, even that it's complicated, and I just see us as working as a team within the school realm that you have them, and as well as healthcare workers. I just think sometimes we all need that. We all need some of this reset ourselves, because it's pretty devastating.
Absolutely.
It's devastating.
You know, and I think that's almost that is one strength that rural communities have, is that we've always, everything we've done, we have to kind of band together as a community, and have that sense of community where it's not a big deal for our community to have a clothing closet, or for our community. One lady in our community brings in every single week boxes of bananas, oranges, cheese sticks, anything like that, then any kid can come down to the office and get it anytime. You know, those are some really powerful things that our community recognizes and realizes, because we really do have that sense of community, of these aren't just your kids or her kids, these are our kids. And so, and the other thing, we don't have resources in our community. You know, I mean, we do if you go to Norwalk, but you know, that's like a light year away for a lot of families, even though Norwalk is only 12 miles away. But you know, it's like, oh, well, we're not in that community, we're in our community. So our school is really the hub of that. You know, and we talked last time about, like, we have a clothing closet, we have after school programs, we have all of these different pieces set in place, because we don't have a YMCA. I mean, we have a library, but that's it. You know, I mean, there isn't a place in our town or towns, because, you know, we have 2 of them. We have like gas stations.
We do have a
Couple-
Dollar General.
We do have a Dollar General. And I'll tell you, with our after school program, when we feed those kids and we teach them how to make a meal or give them a recipe, every single thing that we make, we try to make it healthy, but every single thing comes from Dollar General, so that those kids know, like, and we'll give them like a shopping list, or, well, and they see everything laid out and they're making things, and but they know that every single thing that we incorporate into that after school program can be purchased at the Dollar General, that a lot of them can walk to. So again, understanding where those kids come from, and, you know, knowing that some of these situations are, and the things that these kids have gone through are absolutely mountainous. They're huge. We can't even fathom some of this. But when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, they're just looking for someone to relate to them, to help them regulate their brains, to relate to them, and to reason through everything, and to give them a little bit of a glimpse into what their future might look like, and to help them be able to cope with their situation, and to love them no matter what, you know, and give them that sense of security and that repetition and routine and all of that we can provide in our school. I know that we're probably over time, but I just have one last thought, and then we'll see if Anne has a last thought. But again, we started with the boy that was raised as a dog, heavy stuff. We incorporated a little bit of self-care during that summer that we met. But we also, at the end, like the very last time we met, we had a potluck and we did an art project with our art teacher. And we made a sign, a copper sign that just spells the word hope. And again, it was so important for us when we were like, okay, we have to have like a really good name for this. And we chose the name of Choose Hope. So everything that we do with this initiative, we don't call it trauma-informed care. We just say our Choose Hope team. Choose hope, choose hope, choose hope. Because if we don't have hope, this seems unbearable and like we can't help anybody. Again, this is why in that first year, last year when we trained our staff, everything we did incorporated some kind of self-care for our teachers. We had a calming corner because we wanted to model a calming corner, which we didn't even really talk about, but we provided during our professional development, you know, coffee, hot chocolate, hot tea, hot cider, baked goods, different flavored waters. You know, we really wanted our teachers to come there and feel like they could take a deep breath, and we wanted to take care of them during that time period. Even with our breakout sessions, when we modeled different brain regulations, that was so much of that. I mean, half of what we did was about self-care. So this has been a heavy topic. This has been a heavy book. Everyone now should like go get in a bubble bath with a glass of wine and some good chocolate or something. Yeah. Or take a walk, or, you know, just take a deep breath. Know that all of these beautiful faces here, like, are a support system. And we've really had to create that among our teachers and among our professional organizations to keep moving forward, because we have to take care of ourselves before we can help take care of these kids.
I guess I really don't have any like big aha things, but I just want to thank you for spending your evening with us. Again, it is a heavy topic, but one that I think merits the conversation, and knowing that all of us in one way or another can have an impact, whether it's on a young person or someone in the profession, you know, just being their support, because we need that as well. So thank you for your time, and we certainly appreciate that.
Well, thank you, girls or gals. You know, when you talk about, you know, how supportive your administration is, and I would venture to say that, yes, in fact, you are lucky to have a very supportive administration, but you too, they are very fortunate to have you on board doing what you are doing. And I'm very proud of what you're doing. I'm a fellow counselor. So while it's a heavy subject, I think maybe I wish you lots of inroads and much success. And before all of you go, I neglected to say, I would like for all of you, even though we aren't going to be starting attendance, I need to test out what I need to do for our attendance challenge for convention. So I would like all of you to go to chat and sign in with your name and your chapter name.
I have something too.
Oh.
This qualifies for PDU credit. And if you're interested in that, while you're in the chat there, at the top, the first one is my email address. The folks who attended last week, I already have your information. Donna Myers and Jennifer, and is Christine still here?
Mm-hmm.
If
Yes.
I assume the three of you still want this. If you want a PDU credit, or you want PDU credit. If there's anyone else who wants PDU credit, send me an email with your mailing address and I'll send the certificate to you. Okay, so Diana wants you to sign in.
And once you're signed in, thank you, ladies, for spending time with us. Hope to see more of you for the entire month of March and April and our other breakout sessions. And again, thank you, Anne and Libby. You were wonderful. You are wonderful.
Thank you, everyone, for your years of service.
Take care, everybody.
Yep.
Have a great
Bye.
Thank you. I'm checking the chat to see. Yeah. Okay.
We had a couple that had to leave, I think, probably.
Okay.
But this will help me do what I need to do. So that's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm gonna,
Head out.
yep, gonna head out.
All right. I'll see you tomorrow
Thanks.
night. I'll see you tomorrow night.
Thursday night.
Oh, shoot. Yes. Thursday night. Well,
You take care.
tomorrow. You
All right, I'll see you, whatever.
Yes. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.